Welcome to Leading from Inside Out, Stories of Courage and Leadership in Corrections. I'm Kathy Kenny. This podcast is sponsored by Securus Technologies in partnership with the Moss Group. In this podcast, we will offer a glimpse of what it is like to work behind the fence. We will highlight the unsung heroes and heroines who work in uncertain and sometimes unsafe settings to protect our communities and assist those who are under their supervision by providing programs, services, safety, and security. Staff will share their stories, and by doing so, will hopefully increase the collective understanding of what it is like to work in this field. At times, we will also speak with formerly incarcerated individuals who have successfully re-entered their communities. In today's episode, we talk to Chaplain Susan Bishop regarding her 36-year career with the Georgia Department of Corrections. She discusses her role with inmates, staff, and the transformative power of the choir. Do you mind sharing with our listeners what is your name and how long you've been a chaplain in the Georgia Department of Corrections?
My name is Susan Bishop, and I've been a chaplain for 41 years. I've been a chaplain with the Georgia Department of Corrections for 36 years.
What inspired you to follow the path of working in corrections?
Well, I wish I could say I had like a Damascus Road experience, but it did not happen anything like that. In fact, when I went to seminary, I did not say, I'm going to seminary and I'm going to be a correctional chaplain and work in a prison. That was never even in my mind. I didn't set out at the beginning of my ministry career to do what I've been doing all these years. Even when I graduated from seminary, being a correctional chaplain or working in a prison was not ever on my radar and was never a part of my vocational discernment or decision-making. In fact, it really never crossed my mind. As a Southern Baptist woman who was ordained in the late 70s, 1978, job opportunities for ordained Southern Baptist clergy women were like searching for hen's teeth, as you might could imagine. I was in my seminary, I was about one of 15 women in a student body of around 400. And so it was still very unique for women to go to seminary and study to be ministers and clergy. So it was after I graduated from seminary, I went back and finished up a Master's of Music Education degree that I had started at Georgia State. And after that, I started looking for jobs. And after a lengthy and arduous job search, I was offered a part-time chaplain's position at a work release center in Atlanta for women. This facility at the time was New Horizons, and it was on Ponce de Leon, right downtown. And it is now known as the Atlanta Transitional Center. It's now for men, but at that time it was for women. It was contract position that was being funded by an ecumenical group of churches. The volunteer coordinator at the time was a young Jewish woman, and she had women coming to her asking her questions about religion and about Jesus. I remember her telling me, she says, I told them, I don't know very much about Jesus, but I will find you someone who does. And so she gathered clergy and lay people from a group of about 8 churches and formed a committee. And that committee raised funds and furnished a part-time position there. It was Wayuka Road Baptist, Peace Lutheran, Peachtree Presbyterian, St. Mark's United Methodist, among others. They raised the funds, and I heard about the job, and I went to interview, and I was selected. But at the time, after having been in school for 4 or 5 years, I said, well, I really need a full-time job. And they sort of conferred again and said, well, will you take the half-time job for 6 months? And at the end of 6 months, we promise we'll make it a full-time job. I said, sold. And so that's how I got into corrections. I never set out to be in this career, but I sort of came in the back door or sort of fell into it as my first job. I stayed there for a year, went and did some corrections, chaplaincy work in psychiatric hospitals, liked the corrections work much better, and then so came back in '84 to begin work with the Georgia Department of Corrections, and that's where I've been ever since.
So would you mind kind of walking us through what a typical day in your life as a chaplain looks like?
First of all, I would say this, it's hard to say that there is a typical day because as most people who work in leadership roles in this arena know, that you can come in with a best outlined agenda that you have sat up the night before and said, okay, I need to do this, 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 and this, this. And then one thing can happen, one thing can change, and you might as well just throw that agenda in the trash can. For chaplains, lots of times that's like somebody calls and says that they have a loved one inside the prison who's had a death in the family. So crisis, death messages and crisis get kicked up to the top of the list.
And would you explain what your role would be in that when you get notified that somebody, like an inmate's family member on the outside, has died? Explain what you would do in that situation.
Well, we would receive the call. They find out in a variety of ways. If the call comes in from the outside family, then we receive the call, we take the information, we verify that this is indeed true. Occasionally, not often, but occasionally, you will have someone playing a hoax and just wanting to get to talk to the person. But so we verify that there has been indeed been a death and what the arrangements are for the funeral, et cetera. And then we, of course, call the inmate to our office and we notify them and allow them to call home and connect with their family. Some of them would qualify under ordinary circumstances without the COVID issues that we now are faced with. They would be able sometimes to go via escort to the funeral. And so our job there is to coordinate all the paperwork and be the liaison between the inmate's family, the warden's office, victim services, and the sheriff, making sure all of that gets done in a timely fashion and that all the paperwork is coordinated and signed off on for them to be able to go to a funeral. And so there's the emotional piece in dealing with the inmate and the liaison piece dealing with all the moving parts and the administrative piece of making sure that the paperwork gets done in a timely fashion.
When you talk about escort, you mean, just in case our listeners aren't sure what that means, if it was a situation where the inmate was going to be allowed to go to the funeral, there would be Georgia Department of Corrections staff or the sheriff's office?
It would be the sheriff of the
sheriff's
county.
Office of the county where it happened that would escort them. Okay, so just
the family has to arrange for that.
Right. Just so everybody understands, it's not that the person is leaving in any unsecured type of fashion. They're going to be escorted to the services and then brought back to the facility.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And the sheriff does the escorting.
Okay.
That's one of the major things that we do during our day. And some days we don't get any of those. I have had one day as many as 7.
Wow.
So that's a little bit of a heavy duty day when we have that many, but that's an unusual, very unusual day. In terms of the other day-to-day work, the administrative work, meetings, memos, emails, like most other folks do, program planning what programs and groups and activities we're going to sponsor through chaplaincy, basic general pastoral care and counseling, both one-on-one and group activities, coordinating all the volunteer activities and programs, of course, planning and leading for worship. And we have to make sure, of course, every religion has the opportunity to practice their worship or their faith. So if sometimes that's done through volunteers, but we have to just make sure that the Islamic inmates, the Jewish inmates, the Catholic inmates, the Episcopal inmates, everybody's needs are met in terms of them being able to experience the worship. Ministry with staff is a part of our work that a lot of people wouldn't ordinarily think about. But whenever I train new chaplains or chaplain interns, I really, really emphasize this because it is a very stressful place to work, as you know. It's very difficult, and you're only sometimes as good as your last decision, and you have to be able to make good decisions, sometimes in the spur of the moment, that will stand up. And so the stress in a prison setting is an added factor that many people don't realize, that our staff needs ministry as well. They need support. They need someone to listen to them. Everyone has a bad day every once in a while, and to recognize that. Sometimes we minister in terms of when they have a death in their family. We're asked to either perform the funeral or we try to attend the funeral. We also celebrate joyful things like someone getting married or having a baby or getting a new house, or just paying attention to the daily life of staff is very important. And I make sure that every chaplain I train never underestimate the importance of ministry to staff in this place. Because if the staff are nurtured and feel cared about, then the inmates are also going to have a better day that day. We mentioned about the crisis intervention and death notifications, making pastoral rounds in the buildings, especially the lockdown areas and the infirmary. One of the things that we've been doing a lot of lately is the distribution of toiletries to indigent inmates, those inmates who are not able to buy toiletries, et cetera, from the store. And right now it's very critical that, they have the things that they need for hygiene, et cetera. So we do a lot of that. And we recruit those donations from churches, both in terms of the churches buying those and having them sent to us, or literally bringing the soap, shampoo, deodorant, et cetera, to us. And of course, all that has to be screened through security. Mm-hmm. I also have a great program that I think is unique to my chaplaincy work, and that for the last 21 years, I have had chaplain interns from Emory University, from the theology school. And so we've trained anywhere from 10 to 20 interns for over 20 years. All of these people are not going into correctional chaplaincy. They're going into the parish or into academia or into nonprofit work and ministry in some form. But it allows them the unique opportunity to come inside a prison and know what prison ministry is like from the inside. So if they encounter someone in their parish who has a family member who's incarcerated, then they are better able to make contact with the chaplain and how to facilitate a visit, a pastoral visit for that family member. So that's an exciting, and it's fresh. It keeps me fresh, and it offers new faces and new set of ears to the inmates too when the interns come in.
Yeah, that sounds like a great program. Have you been able to recruit any of those folks to come and work for the Georgia Department of Corrections through that program?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. My assistant chaplain now, Chaplain Kimmy McNeese, was one of my interns.
That's great.
And 9 years ago, I hired her to be a chaplain here, as well as to be the director of the Children's Center program. And she's done a fantastic job with the Children's Center program. So yes.
That's great.
I was the beneficiary of my own program.
That's good. So, that's wonderful. That really is.
And there are others who've gone on to do other things in corrections, not only in Georgia, but in other states.
Okay. So. Wonderful. Sounds like a great program. Now, tell us what keeps you inspired. You've been doing this work, as you said, within the Georgia Department of Corrections for 36 years. It's an awfully long career. So what keeps you inspired each and every day to come in and do the good work that you do?
Well, sometimes, as I said, it wasn't out of my own discernment that I wound up in this work, but I think God knew something that I didn't. So the nature of this work and who I am has been a real good match. And if you know me, we're going to talk about in a minute, you know that one of my loves has been over the years working with music in the correctional setting as a transformative tool, providing an opportunity for those who enjoy music and who are talented to have a sanctuary in which they can express their gifts and abilities. And so the music is a way that I provide for them to express themselves and to have what I call transcendent moments for both me and for them. It lifts us out emotionally and spiritually for a little while out of the difficulties and the stressors of what this environment can be sometimes, and into a higher plane. And the music touches a part of the heart that is some of the deepest parts of the heart. Mm-hmm. You can reach some people with music when they would never come to church. They would never sign up for a Bible study. They would never want any kind of organized religion activity per se, but they have a gift or a talent that I see and that I know if I can get them in the mix of others who have gifts and talents and also spirituality, expressing spirituality, that I can lead them and guide them, and that can become a transformative factor in their lives while they're here. I had one woman who auditioned for the choir one time, and she was known as a little bit of a troublemaker and stayed in and out of lockdown. And I had a rule that you have to have 6 months of clear conduct before you can even audition to be in the traveling choir. Mm-hmm. So she auditioned. I sent her the letter of acceptance. Well, guess where she was when she got the letter of acceptance that I didn't know?
She was in lockdown.
She was in lockdown. And so I had accepted her and she got the letter. And so when she got out of lockdown, and I said, I'd accepted you in the choir and I'm not going to take it back because you are talented and you have musical skills. I said, but you can't go anywhere until you have another 6 months of clear conduct. She said, okay. So a few weeks before that 6 months was up, guess where she wound up? In lockdown. So when she got out, I said, okay, now you got to have another 6 months of clear conduct before you can go anywhere. So that third time was a charm. She managed to control herself and behavior and make good decisions. And so finally, after 18 months of trying, after being accepted, she finally got to go out on the first trip. I know that music can transform people, and it can give them the motivation to do better, live better, and want more for themselves in their lives. So that's sort of an example of, concrete example of how I know it can be transformational for inmates' behavior in here, and once they get on the outside too.
Right.
One of the things that inspires me is that some of the people, I call them my alumni, some of the people I've worked with and have gotten out on parole, when I hear about and I know about them accomplishing positive things, that inspires me. Like, when is the next one coming it's going to take? When is the next one coming in my office around the corner? And you never know who that is or when they might walk in. So I've had two alumni, former inmates, who enrolled in and completed the Master of Divinity degree at Emory Theology School.
Wow.
And one of them is currently working with the Department of Community Supervision and has had that job for about 5 or 6 years now.
That's fantastic.
And doing reentry work herself.
Mm-hmm.
When I work with some of the younger inmates, I see so much untapped abilities and creativity that, got off track so early. I'm thinking of one young woman. She went into the juvenile facilities when she was 15. She had a life sentence. She was transferred to us when she was 17. And last April, a year ago, she got out when she was 41 years old. Mm-hmm. Since she's gotten out, she has gotten her own beauty salon. Her goal and dream was to work with at-risk young women, youngsters. And has been able to get a contract job with the Atlanta Public School System and go in and mentor a group of 15 young girls in the high school there in Atlanta.
And was her focus in doing that, Chaplain, do you think, because she wanted to help steer people away from the path that she took, that she saw that she felt like she had something to offer that population?
If I can just keep one young girl from having to learn the way I had to learn, and that was always her goal. And she's done a TED Talk, on her goals and her dreams and everything. So she has participated in, reentry conferences. And so, she's really doing such positive things. So seeing somebody like that, the two who graduated from Emory, of course, not everybody is going to get out and do things like that. But even if they just go back to their families and to have a stable home life and go back to being good moms and everything,
right?
That keeps me inspired.
Yes.
Everybody, I'm sure, knows about the starfish story, the little boy on the ocean, and he's picking up starfish and throwing them back into the ocean. A man comes along and says, "Son, there's so many starfish out here, it doesn't even matter what you're doing." And he picks up another starfish and he tosses it out into the ocean. He said, it mattered to that one. So, you also have to know that even if you just touch one, that's another generation and that has a ripple effect. So
Absolutely. Okay, are you ready to switch to talking about how the choir got started?
Yes, the work with the choir brings me great joy. I really enjoy talking about it and sharing it. As I said a while ago, my first career was as a high school choral director. The first job I had inside a prison, in addition to the Work Release Center, was in 1984 at what was then called GWCI, Georgia Women's Correctional Institution. And it was the only women's prison in the state of Georgia at the time. And there was a little unit down the road called Colony Farm. I was assigned to the Colony Farm unit. It had about 200 women. And it was just some prefab trailers. And we had church on Sunday morning in the back of it was the dining hall and the church, depending on what time of the day it was and what day it was. I had some really wonderful musicians there. There was a little choir there when I got there. Mm-hmm. And there was a woman who was the captain of security who was there, who was Captain Rose Renfro. She's now Rose Williams, and she sits on the Board of Corrections. But she was already taking the choir out every once in a while, like to her church for homecoming or another church for this celebration or whatever. So when I got down there and I started tuning them up, musically, we would go out and sing, and we would getting more and more invitations to go out. Well, come to my church. Well, come to my church. Come to my church. So that's kind of how the traveling choir started we were called the Colony Farm Gospel Choir.
Mhm.
So we sang our biggest claim to fame down there was we came up in 1986 and sang at the Southern Baptist Convention, which was being hosted in Atlanta in front of about 20,000 people and a lot more who were, it was being televised to a lot more people.
Wow.
So we had about 12 or 15 women. We sang 2 selections, and one of the women who was in the choir actually sang a solo. And when she finished singing, she had just an amazing voice. I don't know whether you know the gospel singer Sandy Patty, but she sang one of her songs and ended on a real high B flat on the end. And when she finished that song, everybody just jumped to their feet and gave her a standing ovation. The warden at the time had allowed the caretaker of her 2 children to come and see, and experience her singing in that context. And when we got backstage, her son, who was probably about 9 or 10 at the time, came running up to her and just threw his arms around and said, Mama, you just tore him up. Mama, you just tore him up. And to see, a son being so proud of his mother, even in spite of her situation and her circumstance, it was just really heartwarming. I will never forget that experience. So that was sort of the biggest thing we sang at, although we did sing at the hometown opening of The Color Purple. When the movie came out, they let them sit in the back on the upper little balcony there and watch the movie. I mean, Alice Walker is from Eatonton, right? So it was kind of like her hometown opening. Right. And there's several of the other celebrities were there. So that was pretty exciting.
So did you get to meet Oprah?
No, she wasn't there. She wasn't there. But Alice Walker was, and some of the other celebrities, but Oprah wasn't there at the time.
Neat.
So that was how the choir started. And then when I moved to Metro in 1987, it was a men's facility. And so I formed a men's choir there. It was a little bit more difficult to travel with the men because there's certain types of crimes that can't go out into the community. So I didn't do as much traveling with them. And so we didn't start traveling again really until Metro became a women's prison in 92. But I didn't really start traveling with the Voices of Hope, which was what I named the choir then, until around 2004. And we began traveling back out into churches and community activities and events.
Is it competitive to get into the choir?
I have criteria that have to do with their security level, their behavior, no DRs, at least for 6 months before you can even audition. And then you have a musical audition. So there's a behavioral quality requirements and criteria, and then there's a musical criteria.
So I'll just clarify, the DRs mean disciplinary reports, right? Just in case our listeners don't know what that is.
Right. Okay. Right. You have to maintain DR
clear conduct.
I don't toss you out of the choir if you get a DR, but I do sit you down. Okay. You can't travel until you get another 6 months of clear conduct record.
Does the same choir that goes out, do they also perform in the facility itself at
when we
services?
Have services and graduations. We have a theology certificate program. They always perform at the theology certificate graduation. We're asked to perform sometimes at other facilities as well as, in some internally. Certain members of the choir are also on the praise and worship team that leads the music for the Sunday services, our Protestant Sunday services. So
great. It's wonderful.
We were able to, in 2008, to release a gospel CD. And we have also, in 2013, we released a Christmas CD of Christmas songs. We've been very blessed in terms of being able to go out and sing at churches. And sometimes the guest speaker at a church will be somebody of note. We have sung when the late Dr. Joseph Lowry was the guest speaker. He was gracious enough to meet the women and shake their hand and say hello. And former Ambassador Andrew Young, a former President Jimmy Carter, Dr. Ben Carson. So one of the things that going out and singing does, it is a management motivational tool for their good behavior, and is an expression for their creativity and their musical gifts. But it also communicates to the outside world a different side and a different view. As you were saying at the beginning, communicates a different perspective of what really happens inside the prison sometimes, and of different abilities and gifts, and paints a different light on who these women are, and also breaks down some stereotypes that are just sort of tossed blanket-wise on all inmates, So it is a very educational tool, us going out in the community. And the other thing is that when the congregation or somebody looks up there and they realize that these women have served time and are serving time, some of them have had long sentences, and they're up there and they're singing gospel music with such joy and enthusiasm. And they say, there's a scripture that says, how shall we sing the songs of Zion in a strange land? Mm-hmm. When these women sing and communicate so enthusiastically and with such joy, singing God's music, it allows the person out in the community and sitting in the church pew to say, wow, if they can still get up there and sing like that, well, maybe I can make it through my day. Maybe I can make it through issues and my problems. So,
yeah, that's great.
So it's a real ministry. I make sure I teach it like that, and that make sure that is the foremost thing in their mind. We're not out here for show or just performance. We're here for a ministry. Mm-hmm. We're here to uplift people and to communicate with people God's love and God's compassion. So
that's great. That's great. It's a wonderful thing to be a part of. Mara had sent me a couple of the clips that I was able to listen to on YouTube last night, and absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. I have zero musical talent, so I'm always so impressed, with anybody that has that. So I think that's an absolute wonderful thing that you're doing. Have you had some women that have been in the choir for years and years during their sentence?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I can imagine. So let's switch and talk about, in addition, we've heard some about your own leadership. Can you tell me about other acts of leadership, large or small, that you have witnessed in the Department of Corrections that you'd like to share?
Corrections is a demanding job. It's a stressful job. And I think the faithfulness of the day-to-day of the officers, some of the counselors, the people who are, that you can count on to be steady colleagues, particularly now with the difficulties going on in the world. It's just to know that you can count on a colleague to be there, to show up, to do what they can, the steadiness of people. And sometimes, sometimes in the corrections, victory is just maintaining steady that day,
mm-hmm. Right.
It's been a difficult day, but you were steady. I look for the steady people. I look for the steady people to encourage them and encourage me. So
mm-hmm. I hear you. Well, given your number of years of service, you've worked with a lot of different staff over time, and I imagine you've seen some amazing things that they've done, things that others may not necessarily think of the way in which they help the population on a daily, there's always the big incidents, where they respond to a medical emergency, and,
right.
We have staff, and not even medical staff, I would imagine, but other staff who save inmates' lives, by performing CPR or doing things of
right.
that.
Right.
But then it's the other day-to-day interactions of showing that they care, showing the humanity, showing where they can clearly tell that the offender's distressed, and maybe getting them to the place they need to get to, or just acknowledging that and recognizing that. So can you share any of those things that you've witnessed over your time?
Well, I think that, there's certain officers when they say, Chap, I've got an inmate down here and such is going on with her. Do you have time to see her? I appreciate that
mm-hmm.
because it's not only getting the inmate's needs met, but those are the officers who know that spending 5 minutes with somebody, as opposed to, just kind of glossing it over or not paying them attention, will save them mounds of paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of these women they're going to act out. They're going to get the attention they need sometimes, regardless of how they have to do it. So if they can pick up the phone and call me and say, Chap, this woman really needs to talk. She's about to go off on me down here. So can I send her up there? Yes, please go ahead and send her, because I know it helps them. It helps the inmate.
It helps the overall security of the facility, right? I mean, it really does.
Right. And that's one less incident report that the warden has to, sort through and sift through.
That's right. That's right. That's very true. Very true. What advice would you give to others right now in this time in our country? There's a lot going on, obviously, in our country, a lot of tension, in the law enforcement world. We've got a national pandemic. What advice would you give to others about keeping hope and continuing to do great work in corrections?
That's a good question. Again, I'll go back to the ability to be steady and stay the course. There's some phrases that I repeat to myself and then I say to others, stay the course, be steady. This too shall pass. There's an old gospel song that says, trouble don't last always. And finding ways to pace oneself and develop better habits of self-care. And that applies to everybody, from the warden on around the table. You're right, there are a lot of stressors in the air these days, both inside and out. So just knowing that one way is to step back, pace yourself, and take care of yourself, and find ways to self-care. Looking out for colleagues and fellow staff members. If someone doesn't look quite right, it's not talking quite right, doesn't seem quite right, take time and pull them aside and say, hey, okay? What's going on with you today? That's really important to notice other staff members around, and also inmates. If they don't look right, don't talk right, and maybe something's going on with them. It can uncover something that's been brooding for a long time and needed to come out. I think that my colleague, Chaplain McNeese, wrote a devotional recently, and one of the things she said was, in uncertain times, we still serve a certain God. In uncertain times, we still serve a certain God. You can look in the Bible and see troubles galore, and you see people who've made mistakes and bad decisions. Whenever I talk to the inmates, sometimes I use this, and I have a favorite sermon that a lot of these folks I call by name. Moses was a murderer. David was a conspirator to commit murder. Rahab was a prostitute. So these people in the Bible were not perfect people. And so we have an example of how God still used them in a powerful way, so that no matter who you are, no matter what your circumstances are, God still has a work for you to do. And that's what I tell them. It doesn't matter that you're here now, but matter is that you come to terms with that, and then you know where you're going in a more positive direction. So God can still use you. And like with the choir, God's using that choir to minister to people on the outside. One time the choir went out, someone sent me this in an email, that at the church there was a guy and his wife brought him to the concert. He didn't know that there was going to be an inmate choir. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want to be in that pew, but he stayed because of his wife. What had happened was he was a victim of a crime, a serious crime. His family was, in a not too recent past. And when he heard the women sing and give testimony, there was a certain level of healing that took place in him. And he shared that with one of the volunteers that had come to hear the choir that night. And so I know that the choir has the capacity in music, and God has the capacity to change people's lives through it. So it's that you just never know when or where or how the Spirit of God is going to move to improve, to change people's lives, and to make them want to reach higher and do better.
Right. So true. One question I did forget to ask about the choir. I understand that the Indigo Girls performed with had some connection with the choir. Did they perform with them at some juncture, or at least one of the Indigo Girls?
Yes. Emily Salyers is the daughter of my worship and liturgy professor. He's now retired.
Okay.
Don Salyers. That's how I was connected with her.
Okay.
And when we got ready to make our CD, she was instrumental in helping us make both the CDs, the gospel CD and the Christmas CD.
That's
and
great.
She performs on each of those CDs.
Wonderful.
And has been very supportive. In fact, back around the 1st of March, she and Amy, the other Indigo girl, said, we'll come up and give a concert if you want us to. And I said, okay, what date works for you? So they came up in early March and gave us a concert here. And so, they've been very supportive, and Emily very, very generous with her time and resources to help make CDs.
I imagine the offenders appreciate that and recognize getting that kind of expert help with the recording and that is so wonderful. It really is. That's great. Yeah. I love to hear those stories of people helping the population kind of reach their full potential. So that's
Right.
absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So do you see retirement at all as you look down the pike, or do you know, based on my limited experience with you, you seem to love what you do. And that to me is one of the best things in life, is to find something that you're passionate about, and being able to serve that through your career is amazing.
Well, eventually, I'm sure that that's in my future. I don't know how soon it will be. And the energy and the stamina that this job takes is pretty demanding. I've made no real concrete plans, though 41 years is a long time.
It sure is.
Yeah. There are pieces of it I could let go tomorrow, but there are pieces of it I don't ever let go.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It's an unknown yet, but I'm trying to plant seeds where some of this work, you know, would be carried on.
Right.
And could continue. The legacy of the choir is something that I've been doing, you know, for over 30 something years. Yeah. I have a lot of alumni who are out there.
That's great. That really is. That's wonderful to be a part of something that's so positive and so uplifting. Mm-hmm. But for everybody, for those that are performing, for those that are listening, and I think it's a wonderful program. I can share with you that one of the things you probably have heard about retirement, and it is very true, you absolutely miss the people that you work with, you know, because it's such a wonderful group of people that work in corrections, and special people, and you'll miss them for sure. But there's some other positive parts too, that I get to do some other things that maybe you don't have time to do now, other volunteer work, other neat stuff. Right. So that's great. That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Yes, two things. And one is one of my colleagues who's since passed away. She was a Muslim chaplain. She was my partner for many, many years in ministry. And she had a specialty. She liked to get a hold of young, sort of rebellious inmates. That was sort of what she loved to do. And she also used to enjoy meeting with the diagnostics within the first week of when they've been there. And she talked about, even in the darkest times, if they could just see a pinhole of hope, a pinhole of light. Mm-hmm. If their lives seemed to be turned upside down, everything was dark and black, and here they were the first week in prison, etc. But she encouraged them to try to find a pinhole of hope, of light in the dark that they saw. And if you even see a pinhole of light, focus on that, because if there's a pinhole of light somewhere behind all that darkness, there's more light. And so I think that behooves us today. And when different things seem dark, we just have to look for that pinhole of light. Right. And the other thing is that I would request prayers for all those who work and who live on a daily basis behind prison walls. And it's a different world, a different environment that we work in every day. One day I was down. It was a deposition having not anything to do with corrections. It was for some other incident. I was asked to come down to downtown Atlanta and go up on this umpty-ump floor of this humongous, beautiful, well-decorated building where this highfalutin law firm, you know, had their offices. And I looked around at the furniture and the view and the pictures and the carpet and everything. And, you know, I was reflecting on, boy, I sure work in a different place than it is. Right, you know, the discrepancy between, you know, downtown Atlanta, you know, highfalutin office space. And, you know, when I walk in my office, I hear, you know, clang, clang and keys and et cetera. But, you know, I wouldn't trade with them. No. I wouldn't trade them. There's something about working in corrections where you are meeting with people where you feel like the rubber is hitting the road. Mm-hmm. You know you have an opportunity to try and make a difference in somebody's life. Right. And that is exciting about ministry. I think I'd probably be bored in the local church. Right. Although I know local church people have their problems too. It's a very intense environment, but it's an environment where around every corner there's somebody who's going through something. Right. And so it's
your ability to change a life. Not too many people get that opportunity. And you have a unique role, obviously, as a chaplain to do it. But I think you'd probably agree with me. That's true of the correctional officer. It's true of the food service worker. It's true of healthcare. All of those combined can really have that opportunity. And And offenders connect with different staff in a different way. So you don't know.
Right.
Sometimes it is the correctional officer that convinces them to get into the program that helps them get the job when they get out. Or maybe it's the chaplain. Maybe, you know,
Right.
That's what I think is so great, that it doesn't matter what your role is in the facility. You can do that.
Yeah. Everybody could offer them a challenge or
Yes.
a role model.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I would just cover the prayers for all of us who work inside corrections,
Yes.
all those who, the inmates, but the staff who work in here. We have some very dedicated staff, and just covet prayers,
Yes.
especially during this time.
Mm-hmm. That's a great way a great ask. And certainly I know that every night before I lay my head down, I pray for all the folks that are in your situation, that are going to work each and every day and facing those challenges and doing it so well. That's great. Okay, is there anything else, Chaplain, that you think we didn't cover that we should, or?
Well, I think we've probably about covered the waterfront. Just in
You've done a
terms of-
fantastic job, by the way. You seem very experienced at this. It's been great. It really has.
Well, I should have learned something in 41 years, right?
Yeah. That's great. That is wonderful. Thanks for joining me today to listen to Chaplain Bishop's journey through corrections.